Delighted for our next event, which is a fireside chat moderated by Ansaf Kareem, featuring Ruth Porat. I'm going to introduce Ansaf, and then Ansaf is going to introduce Ruth. So Ansaf is the founder and managing partner of Latitude Capital, which is a VC firm focused on software and artificial intelligence. He has a long list of accomplishments, including he's a board member of the San Francisco Marin Food Bank. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He's a graduate of Stanford University. He served as senior class president. He holds an MBA and MPP from Harvard, but we won't hold that against him. Please welcome me, or join me in welcoming Ansaf and Ruth to the stage.
Thank you, Neil, for that kind introduction. Ruth, good to have you here and good to see you.
Great to be with you. Great to be back on campus.
Ruth doesn't need an introduction for any room she walks into, and certainly not one here at Stanford. But for some context, Ruth grew up in Palo Alto. Her father was an engineer at Slack, at the Stanford Linear Accelerator. She did her undergraduate work at Stanford. She was on the board of trustees at Stanford, at the board of the management company at Stanford. And outside of her Stanford service, she's had an okay career as well. She has a graduate degree from London School of Economics, an MBA from Wharton, and started her career on Wall Street at Morgan Stanley, where she served in various leadership positions, including CFO. And then about a decade ago, she decided to trade in the Gilded Halls of Finance for sunny California again, and she came back and became CFO of Alphabet, and then now holds the title and position of President and Chief Investment Officer of Alphabet. So thank you again, Ruth, for being here.
Thank you.
So Ruth, every day we wake up in the morning and we read about AI in the news, not just in Silicon Valley, but everywhere. And so I want to start there. So Alphabet has said that they are investing $75 billion just this year in AI and building out infrastructure and capacity. If we rewind the clock a quarter century ago, Google transformed the way that all of us engage with technology and the internet in particular. If we want to find a piece of information, we used to have to go to Green Library and find out what the GDP of Norway might be, but today we can just do it on the click of a button. We can find the local coffee shop, we can figure out what the stock price is for a certain company. If we fast forward 5 years from now, what is the promise of AI for all of us sitting in this room? How will it impact our daily lives in a tangible and practical way?
So I think we are living in one of the most extraordinary times as a result of precisely your question, the potential with AI. And when we talk about it, we think of it in four ways. First is the economic upside. So the estimates in the US alone is that AI could add $4 trillion to GDP by 2030, could add $20 trillion annually to global GDP in a decade. That assumes what economists call diffusion, really implementation across industry, across the public sector. And it's not about using a chatbot. It's about radically rethinking what is your business, how do you interact with customers, how do you think about all elements of operations, how do you think about risk management. So I keep calling it a radical rethink of what is your business. And there's that tremendous upside that comes with it. And so I think for each one of us, starting on that journey is important. It is still very early days to radically rethink one's business. The other, if you want us to fast forward, that's really exciting is AI is advancing science. And I'm really proud to work with two Nobel Prize winners. They just won the Nobel this past fall, Demis Hassabis and John Jumper, and it was for something called AlphaFold, which hopefully many of you are very familiar with. But simply stated, it has been described as the single greatest contribution to drug discovery in our lifetime. They chose to open source it, and so 2.5 million scientists around the world are using this in 190 countries. And so what can we envision? What can we do? As they describe it, Demis has said, this is science at digital speed, and so addressing solutions for diseases. The third is everything around critical social issues. What can we do to enhance education, provide operating leverage for teachers, individualized paths for students. A lot of people in this room can speak about this a lot more eloquently than I can. There's also what can we do with healthcare, early diagnosis, better care. So super excited about social issues, and then something I'm looking forward to hearing the next panel talk about, the application to security and just fortifying security. So the potential across every one of those areas, I think, is profound, and we're at really early stage. And I'll sort of answer your question with one more story. At Google 20 years ago, we started on this journey on Google Translate. And over the last 20 years, we've translated 250 languages. In the last 6 months alone, we added 110 of that 250 languages. And the reason I wanted to end with that is it's probably the best way to answer your question. You move along at a certain pace and then it inflects. And that's where we are with the application of AI. So for each one of us thinking about how more profoundly can we think about whether it's a business or the way we approach our discipline or how we run a city, it can be pretty profound.
So if we take what happened in November 2022, when most of us in this room probably had the first chance of actually engaging with AI, and that was the ChatGPT moment, when most consumers probably understood for the first time how they could engage directly with AI, leverage it for their own capacity. You and I know that Google has been at the forefront of AI for several years before that, including the foundational research that led to a lot of those advancements. I wanted to ask you, if we put ourselves in the shoes of Google and the management team at that time, even though AI had been in the ads business, it had been behind the scenes in Google Photos, Google Lens, and so many other products, what was the decision around not releasing a direct-to-consumer product that would really capture the zeitgeist in the way now that Gemini has done, but ChatGPT did beforehand?
Yeah, it's an important question. Our view very strongly is that Google search is about trust and quality. You expect accuracy when you query for whatever it is you want. And Sundar talked about this quite a bit. It's like if your child is sick and you wake up in the middle of the night and you Google, for my 4-year-old, what's the appropriate dose of Tylenol, it can't be wrong. And many people learned this term hallucination when ChatGPT broke out to the forefront. We knew hallucination was a risk and weren't prepared to take the risk with something as important as Google search, and have found a way to weave it together with AI overview so that you are playing with it, you do have that firsthand experience. And for us, what's really exciting is building on this momentum that we see. And our view very strongly is it is still very early days, but that Google comes at it with a very differentiated approach. When you start with the research that we have led by Nobel Prize winners, and then to your point, it was experienced and touched and felt by people through ChatGPT, but they had already been living it for so many years. So billions of people are already benefiting from Google AI, whether it's something like autocomplete in email or your photo search, things that we take for granted. We don't think of that as AI. That just is a product is working better. And it goes right into the chips that we use and the ability, therefore, to deliver models. So we're accelerating the pace of what we're seeing, but that was taking you back to that moment. Reputation is so important, and delivering for people around the globe was very important and is important.
And talking about safety, risk, security, I want to talk about DeepSeek. And so for the audience, last month there was a big news around a Chinese company releasing a model called DeepSeek, which many of you probably read about. I think it shattered a lot of perceptions in the AI community around a couple of core assumptions, both across the fact that maybe the ROI or the necessity of investment across AI could yield a higher ROI with lower investment, the fact that China is probably not that far behind us in AI as many experts had deemed to be the case over the last couple of years. Curious if you can use that as a jumping off point to talk about China and US as it relates to AI competition. What did you see in the DeepSeek moment? How has that impacted the way you think about US policy as it relates to competition in AI?
So a lot in your question. I think the one thing that we and others have been very focused on for quite some time is increasing efficiency of every element of compute. It's efficiency in models, it's efficiency in chips, and that's been a key journey that we've been on. We saw it in what we call classic compute, and we're seeing it as well in AI compute. Our most recent TPUs, which is basically our version of GPUs, if we're not familiar with it, is 67% more efficient than the prior generation. Models are more than 100 times efficient, and each one of us who's working on this is powering that efficiency curve at a very rapid rate, and that's in part what you're seeing with DeepSeek. Our view is still that the US companies are ahead when it comes to frontier models and chips, but I think it was a very helpful moment in certain respects because there's clearly a tremendous amount of innovation and focus in China, and leadership never can be taken for granted, as anyone sitting in Silicon Valley knows. And so this put a real spotlight on the fact that the US may be in the lead now, but don't take it for granted, and we want to ensure, collectively, we should want to ensure that we have a pro-innovation investment environment that still protects on the downside, but we can't take this for granted. And so that was one really important element of the experience.
And you talked about this in relation also to US and China when we spoke a couple of days ago. You were at Davos last month, you were in DC earlier this week. You've been speaking with a lot of world leaders about AI. And it sounds like the refrain you keep hearing is that no one wants to be left behind in the future of AI. Tell us about the policy implications for the US. How should we be positioning ourselves as it relates to the broader global community?
You know, it has been a recurring refrain traveling the globe. Heads of state say they see this moment. They see the economic upside. They also want to talk about what it means for the delivery of education or healthcare, or in certain places, how can we enhance agriculture? That's the lowest strata of the economy. What can we do to enhance productivity, yield? And so wherever I go, there's a sense this is a moment in time and we can't be left behind. And what I also very clearly hear is just this deep respect for the US and US values of wanting to work with us. But if they can't work with the US for whatever reason, they're not going to be left behind. They will find an alternative approach. And so I think levels of engagement continue to be important in ensuring, again, that that's the approach as we're collectively looking at what enables all of us to capture the upside while protecting on the downside. And there's a really current issue in front of the administration now, which was the final days of the prior administration. They came out with some export controls. It's called AI diffusion rule, and it limits exports of chips and also classifies our allies in tiers. And that's been befuddling for many because the question is, do we want to engage or do we not? And I think there's a journey we need to go through that maximizes the opportunity to engage while putting a lot of the safety guardrails in place, because I don't think it's appropriate or responsible to just throw it overboard. And so those are the types of things where it's imperative that we have the opportunity to help build out whatever's needed as countries are going on their journey.
And are you concerned about the future state of a world where there's more of a haves and have-nots as it relates to AI power and the economic capture related to that? How do you think about that in the context of some of the
that's
stuff?
why I think it's such an important question when I hear over and over again, we cannot be left out of this transformation. We see the economic upside. It's fascinating to me the number of times a head of state doesn't actually start with, will you build a data center? What deep kind of dollar commitment will you make to our country? I've often heard, what will you do to help train our people? What can you do on education? And time again, hearing similar kind of refrains, I came up with a visual model of a triangle that's incredibly important for every country. And what's in the triangle? Well, first, it starts with Google's mission, organize the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful, which simply put means make sure that everyone, everywhere, can have the same access to information, products, markets that everyone here in Silicon Valley is privileged to have. Well, how do you get that? First of all, you need to have the infrastructure in place. You need data centers and very importantly, you need to be linked into this digital world. And we build subsea cables around the globe. That's an important part of the unlock. And very much to your question about this divide, as an example, we built a subsea cable from Africa to Australia. And when you do that, you're building this big trunk. You can then light up countries, island nations along the way. And when we connected Fiji as an example, the prime minister, I'll never forget this because his comment was, this is a gift to all of Fiji because it creates so many opportunities. It ensures that everyone has this access. That's what's really exciting. So that's the second part of the triangle. And it's really important for all of us to keep coming back to the fact that 1/3 of the globe is still not connected. So you need to be connected. And then it goes to the third part, which is, and what about education and building really a sense of what is that opportunity? And very importantly, what are the skills that you need to thrive in this digital economy? That's the triangle. I think only when we come at it thinking about all points to the triangle, can you get to your question? Can you actually close that opportunity gap and help address some of the disparities that we already see?
No, then one point of that triangle is obviously data infrastructure, and a lot of that, what powers that is energy. And so I was in conversation with a chief product officer of one of the top LLM companies who said the biggest bottleneck they see for further advancements in AI is actually energy. And so I know we talked a little bit about the opportunity there, both from the private sector as well as potentially from public sector investment. Unpack that for us a little bit. What are the needs from an energy perspective? How should the U.S. be thinking about that from a national perspective?
Well, first, the context, and you set it up well. The only reason we need more, not the only reason, one of the important reasons we need more energy is because of this extraordinary opportunity, which if implemented well, that is not to take for granted. If there is diffusion across the economy, you have an economic uplift. The other drivers of the need for energy are additional onshoring of manufacturing, electrification across industries. All of these are economic catalysts for the U.S. So in many respects, we need to invest because we have this unlock opportunity, coupled with the fact that there's been underinvestment in the grid for the last couple of decades. I think what's encouraging is there are some immediate opportunities that collectively we need to focus on. One is that the way the incentives around the grid are you're incented to add capacity, not optimize existing capacity. And according to the prior Department of Energy, if what is called grid enhancing technologies, things, for example, to load balance across the grid at different times as needed, are applied to the grid, you can unlock up to 100 gigawatts of capacity just with existing infrastructure. And what strikes me, having lived my whole life in the private sector, you wouldn't add capacity before you optimize what you have. You're not going to maximize return on invested capital if you're not optimizing what you have. So that 100 gigawatts of capacity by applying grid-enhancing technologies, I think is exciting. At Alphabet, we've been incubating a company called Tapestry for about 7 years now, which is all about grid planning and the ability to actually help with some of these issues. And in fact, we've been working with grid in Chile and have been able to take some decisions down from weeks to days. And it's that kind of work that's critically needed. And then some of the things around permitting to get this backlog onto the grid. But there's some very important work around adding additional sources of energy. And one of the things we've done at Google for a long time is forward market commitments, because we find that actually ends up catalyzing more investment. So for example, we were early in geothermal, a company called Fervo, which we're really proud went through development stage and is now moving onto the grid. We were the first corporate purchaser, first corporate to make a forward market commit on SMR, small modular reactors on nuclear, with a company called Kairos. And what was important about that is it's multi-tranche, like 5 to 7 tranches, so we can keep building these, building these small modular reactors. These are going to be important additions to what's being done. And then there's obviously a lot of capital that's flowing in, and so you're seeing more and more, I would say, interesting structured solutions. We did one with TPG here up in San Francisco and Intersect Power to look at building basically campuses where you bring together the energy sources with what you need on data centers. So a lot of focus on it. Definitely need to expand capacity. But I started where I did because that's a good thing. If we didn't have growth, we wouldn't need it. I'd rather have the growth and put the investment behind it.
Yeah. And the third leg of that triangle is on education. And so I want to touch on that. Obviously, it's an international issue, but even here in the US, if we think about the downstream impact of AI, for the first time, we've gone through technology revolutions before, industrial revolution. We've seen impacts of globalization have a huge impact on workforce and labor. But this one feels a little different. There's an opportunity here where the diffusion of technology changes the pace of change, as well as the fact that for the first time, the people being affected might look more like knowledge workers, white-collar workers. We're sitting here at Stanford where the #1 major is computer science. We're seeing those safe areas, professional areas getting potentially disrupted. Talk us through how you think about the disruption happening potentially in the workforce, and then how should educators be rethinking some of the opportunities around AI?
Well, throughout history, more jobs have been created than destroyed. In fact, 60% of the jobs that exist today did not exist 80 years ago. And that's just this constant evolution. the way I think about that is in the aggregate, that's beautiful, but if you're the person who's displaced, it becomes very binary very quickly, and that does not work. And so we and many others have put real money and effort behind really workforce development programs, ensuring that people have the skills needed in a digital world. What are AI skilling programs? We created an AI opportunity fund. And I think this becomes something that not one company can do alone. Many companies need to work on it. We created a program actually with a consortium of 250 companies that will take our certificates and look at them as creating the ability to then move into a role in cybersecurity or other areas to enhance this kind of evolution of what is work. And I think the public sector has a role to play in that as well. You know, one of my favorite books is actually Carol Dweck's book, which hopefully everyone in this room has read because she's such an extraordinary Stanford scholar, called Mindset. And it's all about the importance of actually having a growth mindset. I've read it a couple of times. I think that at a time like now, it's again a reminder that it's important that we do have a growth mindset, because the only thing that's constant is going to be change. And so we need to protect again with programs that enable people to evolve, and there will be disruption, as there typically is, but I think that that's the effort to smooth it and create new opportunities.
Yeah, and related, you know, at Stanford, you know, generally in academia and technology has had a tight symbiotic relationship, and obviously Stanford and Silicon Valley, you know, we're seeing something interesting probably for the first time where academics and researchers are entering the private sector with regards to AI at a pretty fast pace. And I'm curious, given the fact that CapEx investment, access to compute is so important, pushing the ball forward with regards to AI research, what is the role of universities and research centers in this new wave?
Look, I think a critically important role as academia has always had. We're really proud of the work that we do with universities across the country and around the globe. And a lot of it ends up being really partnerships with scientists within academic institutions. That's a core part. And oftentimes it's in areas that leverage AI, but in related areas. So for example, in biology, other avenues within healthcare or the sciences. And that's a way to bring the best together to try and make advancements. And then we look at different programs, to your point, about what is compute that we can make available to universities. So there's a lot of collaboration that goes on.
And you know, one topic which is not part of the triangle, but I know is close to your heart, is healthcare and technology. And you touched on it a little bit in the beginning. But you're a cancer survivor, and I know you're deeply involved with the medical community. Tell us about what you're so excited about with regards to healthcare and technology, and why is it that you see a lot of opportunity there right now?
Well, a lot of our engineers are really excited because if you can use technology to do something like save lives, it gets people pretty excited for the obvious reason. It is personal for me, and I think that what's extraordinary about cancer is that if you can have early detection, you can really make a difference between survival or not, or the course of treatment. Is it stage 1, stage 2, or is it stage 4 because you've missed it early on? And what's pretty stunning is 40% of people in the United States will be diagnosed with cancer at some point in our lifetime. You know, and the way I think about it is if you look at the person to your left and the person to your right, statistically, one of you will be identified with cancer, diagnosed with cancer at some point in your lifetime. And at Google, years ago, we pioneered early diagnosis of metastatic breast cancer. And what's stunning in the testing of it is they looked at a large sample size, and 20% of the cases were missed when manually done, and then tested when you combine a radiologist with AI, captured, and there was no false positives. And so the notion that we can actually improve early diagnosis, I think, is extraordinarily inspiring. It's operating leverage for doctors, for radiologists. And that's true with other forms of cancer. We're doing it with what's called diabetic retinopathy, blindness that comes from diabetes, a big problem around the globe. We're seeing early detection on other diseases as well. And so when you can use AI to make a difference like that, it goes back to your other question about what about the gaps between those who have and those who don't. This means that average doctors are now going to become superhuman again, because they're going to have the assist that comes from early detection with AI. And so I think that's super exciting. I think again, AI is not a panacea. You still need to have the rest of the ecosystem work so you can take care and deliver, but it is an important part of the puzzle. And we see this in so many areas with healthcare, so it's, to us, one of the breakthrough areas.
And like we mentioned in the beginning, Google was ahead of the curve in many ways with regards to AI, investing way ahead of the moment that we're in today. What are things 10 years from now that Google's investing in today that when we look back, we'll say these were the one or two things that clearly were the next big breakthrough?
So I'm often asked that question, and I sort of have to start with, we were continuing to invest in search. And if you think about it, you can take for granted that what Google, many of us in this room, look at the average age of the room, remember the 10 blue links. I don't know if all the students remember the 10 blue links, but obviously Google started as 10 blue links and then evolved to text search and then to voice search and now multimodal search. And we have 20 billion searches a month on something called Lens, where you can just take a photo of something. I can take a photo of your cool jacket and figure out where I can get it. That's pretty remarkable, and we are continuing to add to it. AI overviews, I love. It gives you kind of an organizing principle to launch off from. It's going to become more agentic. So this will continue to evolve. And then on top of it, we're not going to see collectively this incredible economic unlock unless businesses in the public sector change the way they operate. So we are definitely continuing to invest in our cloud business because that's the part of Alphabet that really works with the public and private sector on this radical rethink and unlock. And then I get very excited about Waymo, sort of similar to the question about health. When the founders started on Waymo many, many years ago, one important part of it is 1 million people die on the road every year in car accidents. And if there can be a safer solution with self-driving cars, which don't get distracted and aren't tired and don't do a bunch of other stuff we all probably wish we had never done when we were driving, that is a good thing. And what we're already seeing, the incredible safety differential for miles driven, the number of accidents is pretty stunning relative to manual driving, and we're continuing to roll it out. Hopefully everyone in this room has experienced a Waymo up in San Francisco. If you haven't, it's pretty extraordinary, and we're continuing to roll it out across the country. And we're actually doing a pilot now in Japan, so you're going to be seeing more of Waymos and hopefully enjoying them.
Amazing. And
How many people have been in a Waymo? Just so I can get. Woo! I love this. Okay, so we got some more to come. You can just download the app. I'm doing my own personal marketing.
The interesting thing about your career, which has obviously spanned technology, finance, so many different areas, if I'm not mistaken, you joined Wall Street right before, in 1987, right before a crash. You were a covering tech during the dot-com boom and bust, and you were part of the leadership team at Morgan Stanley during the financial crisis. You joined Hank Paulson afterwards to help the government during the aftermath of that. Are we in an AI bubble? And what are the signals and lessons that we can learn from that to be applied today?
So I'm going to answer your question sort of a different way. One of the many lessons learned from living through these various periods was actually probably the most profound time was working with Hank Paulson during the financial crisis. And I was seconded down. We went through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, then all through Lehman Week into AIG. And that was probably the most terrifying time, thinking that after Lehman's bankruptcy, that was it, and getting a call from Treasury saying, actually, we worked on the wrong thing. AIG will be out of money in 3 days by Wednesday. And as I came out of that experience, there were a couple of lessons that really hit, and I didn't appreciate it as much till I got to Google, and I was asked, what did you learn from the financial crisis? Which struck me as odd because Google kind of only saw sunny days. But I realized those lessons are really important in good times and bad, and they somewhat go to your question. The first one is identify your greatest source of vulnerability early and protect against it. And in a bank, that meant have ample liquidity. And you couldn't get it in September, October for any amount of money, but you could have gotten it 6 months early, and it could have fortified you to get through the problem. I think where we're living today, it is about application of AI. It's this unlock. It goes back to my story about Google Translate and a vertical lift. You do not want to be the one that's waking up too late and realizing that you're behind in your industry. There's a kind of overused expression. that you're not going to lose to AI, you're going to lose to the person who is using AI. And so what it's really about what's the application and the unlock so you can be ahead of what you're doing. And it's about truly differentiated innovation. That's one important lesson. The other really important lesson was from AIG. AIG blew up, not because the insurance business blew up, but as many of us have read, it was the derivatives sub in the UK, and they had no visibility on it. And so my expression coming out of that was you can't drive a car with mud on the windshield, you can't run a business, you can't run a city, you can't run anything with mud on the windshield, you need data and analytics to clear it away. So for companies that are trying to gauge on this journey, where am I? Am I over-investing? Am I going to win? You need data and analytics, and you need to be honest with yourself about it. Not everyone wins. You need to pivot. You need to move if you're on a journey, and you've got to hold yourself accountable. And then the third really important lesson is you need to have horizontal vision. And I think Hank Paulson built a brilliant team that enabled us to connect the dots around the globe to get a sense of what was working, what was at risk. And I think as leaders, each one of us needs to do that. And again, not everything works, but what you need to do is be able to navigate through complex times. And that's why I say it's easier to fortify ahead than to deal with it in the moment. And now is the time where we need to each take stock of what we're doing well and how to continue to actually thrive.
And maybe a different angle on that question. So Google's, we mentioned spending $75 billion this year. I think Microsoft, Meta, similar dollar amounts roughly.
That's just CapEx.
And that's just CapEx, yeah, exactly. So if you think about that, like that dollar value, that magnitude of capital going into this space, you're a CFO for many years. How do you think about balancing the conversation with shareholders on ROI in the short term while clearly wanting to invest in the long term in AI?
I think that any company that does not invest for the long term is unequivocally sowing the seeds of its long-term destruction. And when you have something as important as this, again, go back to that curve. If you miss it, you're sowing the seeds of your long-term destruction. And I learned that lesson really early on, actually at Morgan Stanley. One of my first deals I ever worked on was the hostile takeover defense for Gillette. And it was eventually written up in what became an iconic book, if you study business, From Good to Great. And the reason I think it was written up in there is when we went in to talk about the defense, the CEO at the time said, I want to remain independent. Do what you can to keep me independent, but you cannot touch my R&D budget. Because if you do, I'm better off dead than alive without a forward product line. And we didn't know what it was. We just knew whatever the funding was, we couldn't touch it. We later found out it was the sensor razor. But that notion, I'd rather be dead than alive without a forward R&D budget, without that pipeline, I think was a great message for all times. And it really guided me throughout everything I did at Morgan Stanley, at Google. You need to invest for the long term. The future is here before you know it. And so Google's been investing in AI for many, many years. And in those early days, who knew where it was going to go? I think there was a clear understanding this is a fascinating place to be. But Waymo's another example. There were many times where it was, that's a lot of investment to build this extraordinary capability, and now we see what the take-up is and how people are responding to it and what the safety statistics are. But you have to invest early, because if you wait until that moment in time, you can't catch it.
That's great. And maybe two more questions for me, and then we can open up to the audience. You just came back from DC. We've obviously have a new administration. I know it's fresh, only 4 or 5 weeks in, but it seems like a busy 4 or 5 weeks. Clearly, this new administration came in with a pro-business, pro-technology posture. Curious, what have been your learnings so far? Again, coming fresh from DC, how are you interpreting what's been happening there for your own business?
Well, they've been very clear. The president said this. He views this as the golden era of innovation, and we most certainly view this as an extraordinary time for innovation. And so the place I spend my time is really all about ensuring that there is a pro-innovation investment environment, and there's a lot of work around that. I think for all the reasons that we've already talked about, this opportunity at this moment in time to continue collectively investing to get the benefit of the upside is profound. And so there's a lot of effort around that. I think the administration's also been very key that energy is going to be an important part of it, and I think there's some steps that we can collectively take that see that unlocked so that collectively we can benefit from the upside. And those are the key areas. It's been, I think, important to have this clarity and line in the sand that technology and what's occurring here and across the country with innovation is important, and let's continue pushing forward with it.
I wanted to end my questions with a personal question. So you've obviously reached the heights of finance and technology, and when you graduated Stanford, you obviously went to Wall Street. I'm sure at that time there weren't a lot of role models who looked like you in finance at that time. You asked this question in a lot of your interviews I've heard, which is that what is the defining moment before the age of 16 that drove you to where you are today? And so I want to ask you that same question, especially for the Stanford students in the audience. What was it about your childhood or upbringing that got you to the point where it drove you to reach the heights that you did?
First of all, impressive homework you did. That's like amazing. I get the table turned on me. So before the age of 16, I think probably the most important thing for me, my father was a Holocaust refugee. He escaped from Vienna right after Kristallnacht. His father was taken at Kristallnacht. And he made it on one of the youth boats to Palestine. And as soon as he was old enough, he enlisted in the British Army. He had no high school education. And he figured if he survived the war, he wanted to get to a country where he could be safe, which meant either the UK or the US. So he started teaching himself engineering while fighting in the 2 battles of El Alamein. And eventually, after the war, he no high school, no college. He ended up getting to a master's program at the University of Manchester, first in physics, and then eventually a PhD in engineering. He got to the States. Harvard was a stop. People do make mistakes along the way. He finally got to Stanford. I was very excited to get to Stanford, and was, as you said, a part of that early amazing SLAC team designing the instrumentation for the atom smasher. But we went back to England when I was 9, and it was ostensibly so he could finish his PhD. He was in a hurry to get to a place where he could get citizenship, which got us here. But it was also so he could go back to Vienna and try and find the records. And it was the first time I actually understood precisely what the family history was. He hadn't been able to talk about it. And it's when he told us that education is a passport for life and that anything is possible. He loved this country. He said anything is possible. And I remember my mother coming back and saying to me and my younger sister, she was a psychologist, and she said, for whatever reason at 9, I needed to hear, as a woman, I think it's important that I have a career outside of the home. I think you should have a career outside of the home. It's my identity. And so I had this sort of in stereo, anything's possible, and as a woman, anything was possible. And that was at a very young age. And they always applied themselves that way. Like, it's amazing, only here at Stanford would people probably get excited about building a binary machine and soldering stuff when I was like 12 years old with my dad. Anything is possible. So I think it was, clearly there were a lot of, in financial institutions, there weren't that many people who looked like me in positions, but it didn't really matter. I didn't see it that way. Just anything was possible.
Incredible. Okay, with that, I'd love to open it up to the audience for questions. If you have a question, please state your name and affiliation, and I'd love to hear from the audience.
John Howe. The question I have is Google has a tremendous share on the search side, and obviously with this proliferation of AI, and you guys have obviously thought through your strategy. What can you how do you get us comfortable that you will still come out on the other side having the dominance in market share in terms of this overall search or AI process?
So I think I would answer or maybe rephrase the question. There are 2 parts to it at a minimum that I would think are really relevant. One, I've already talked about. Google has always been about continuing to evolve what is search, and we are continuing to evolve what is search, and are very excited about the fact that what we're seeing with AI overviews and some of the other work that we've been implementing is queries are richer, deeper. That's what's typically happened as search has evolved, and you're certainly seeing with younger people the level of engagement as a result of this sort of query depth opportunity, the extremely sizable context windows, et cetera. So that's one part of the equation. The other part of the equation I've already talked about, which is, again, if you see a 4 trillion unlock, economic unlock, theoretical potential, the range of estimates is huge because it does depend on diffusion across industry. The real question, I think, is how do you generate a return on capital that's attractive? What's the upside from the investments that are being made? And that investment is in support of also what we're doing that creates tremendous economic value for our public sector, private sector partners. And so I think that we're looking at multiple, and that's only dealing with a part of the investments we're making. Transformation, what you're seeing in YouTube, again, benefiting from AI in part, but a whole host of other things. We're really excited about the application of AI across our business and are very much consistent with my comment looking at how do you invest to drive an exciting return on that invested capital. And it does mean work, again, with our partners to get the unlock as well as what we're doing on the search side. And that's why my answer on what's the next big thing starts with search.
Hi, Ruth. My name is Emma. I'm an undergraduate here, and I'll also be joining Google in the fall.
Woo, great. Welcome.
Thank you. So yesterday I heard one of the founders comment on Google's in-person work policy. I think Eric Schmidt has made similar comments in the past, and I'm curious, zooming out a little bit, how you think through Alphabet can maintain a spirit of dynamism and agility when historically in Silicon Valley, a lot of companies that have achieved its level of size and scale have become more complacent over time.
So our founder's comment, I think Sergey made a comment that some of you probably have seen. He is extremely energized by what's going on right now with AI, back to the prior question. In fact, a couple of years ago, he made a comment that this is the most exciting time in computer science. And what we did with computer science up to that point in time was just scratching the surface of what's possible. And when he first said it, I got chills because it's not like Google hasn't done okay. And yet we've just scratched the surface of what is possible. And the energy is palpable with the team that's literally going around the clock. The engineers across our Google DeepMind team, because this is such an extraordinary time. And I think he was conveying the level of excitement that he has. We have a policy that we're looking at 3 days with 3 days minimum in the office, sort of generally, and teams do beyond that what they want to do. And I think that what's really important and core to your question is we want to have a great, exciting, serendipity type environment like we've always had with a lot of fun. And there's still a lot of those connection points and other things. And our view is that that's, at this time, the right thing that continues to be a magnet for the greatest talent possible on the planet and continues to connect people as it makes sense to do to continue to drive the level of innovation and curiosity and development that delivers the experiences that we have. And I think what we found is that for many people, there are different ways that one can work together. And so we've got a lot of different paths going forward. But the level of excitement, you can feel it, you can see it.
Hello, Ruth. Troy Greet. So thank you for today. And you're talking about all these unlocks, and I think it's just been recently reported that Alphabet's participated in a round for a humanoid robotics company, which I find quite interesting. Would love to hear what you and the folks at Alphabet think about the potential unlock in robotics and maybe humanoids in particular in the future.
We think robotics is an extraordinary opportunity. We actually have a company internally within Alphabet called Intrinsic, which is a robotics operating system, and are doing a number of investments in robotics. I think there are places where it, again, provides operating leverage for each one of us. There are certain places around the globe where people are saying, I simply don't have the breadth of people that I need. Demographics are not our friend necessarily, and what can I do that unlocks the capacity of robotics to increase productivity and let me redeploy people where I want to redeploy them. So I think there's an opportunity that's pretty profound. There are multiple ways that AI can work with us, and some people will say it's a tutor that's sitting on your shoulder and can make entry-level workers more efficient because it helps you kind of get up the learning curve faster. There are other places where, the example on radiology, where it assists you to get to a better outcome, and you can do it in less time. It gives people back the time they need to be able to focus where they need to focus. And there are other areas like robotics. I think the estimates on this economic upside, a large percentage of that unlock is from robotics.
Thank you so much. You mentioned both viewing education as really a passport for opportunity and success, and also the importance of R&D, like from a corporate perspective, but also a national level. And there's been a lot of attention, especially on university campuses this week and in like the past few weeks, about changes in funding for universities and research. And you've seen that with like a reflection in changes in like the number of PhD slots and also the funding of university labs. What role do you think Alphabet and other companies play in developing essentially new pathways to sort of rebuild that system if there is going to be a gap in what universities are able to do to sort of provide education and like the fostering of new ideas for the next generation?
So it's obviously very new, a lot of the announcements that have come out, and it's also, I'm not sure many in this room would be more familiar with where do these eventually go, what actually are the ultimate decisions, early announcements. So I think it's premature for me to comment on what may be coming out of DC. I think that a lot of the work that we're doing, I've already, is providing grants so we can't fill in everything the private sector, I don't think can. And as with everything, it means that there may need to be some sort of evolution. So it's an incomplete answer. I think it's too early to answer that question. If I may, I'm going to switch in. This is not your question, but I thought you were going in this direction. And I got really excited by a conversation I was having talking about the importance of education and where AI can play a role in this opportunity, unlock, passport for life. What does it mean to leverage teachers, leverage students, individualized training, et cetera? And this was during UN General Assembly Week. And we were at a small dinner, and Minister for Digital Transformation from Togo was there and said, let me actually make that real for you. In Africa, the average age is 19, so half our population is under the age of 19. We can't have enough teachers to teach those students. And so what we need, if we want to give people this passport for life, is we need to have technology as an assist, both for the limited number of teachers and for students to go on their own journey. What is a society like if you can't educate your children? And to me, I apologize, I know I'm not answering your question. I'm going in a different direction because I don't have that answer, but I loved this point, which is technology, again, is not a panacea, but where we can apply it in something like this, where I'm hearing from a minister, half our population is under the age of 19. We need help on this. It's very inspiring. And so there needs to be more work, no question about it. And I think on the policy front, that's a work in process.
Hi, thanks for your time this afternoon. Google's always been a very employee-centric organization, benefits, thoughtfulness, all sorts of things. I'm kind of curious about your thoughts of the implementation of DEI and now more recently the roll-off of it. Maybe what did it contribute? What did it take away? You've been in the seat for a while, so you've seen fads come and go. So just some context would be great.
Yeah, so, obviously as a federal contractor, we had to take a look at all of our programs the way everyone does and make some changes. I think the important point that we keep stressing internally is that we've always been focused on hiring the best people on the planet and building the best teams possible. And our commitment to that remains, it's as strong as it's been. And so I think we want to continue to be a magnet for great talent everywhere and continuing to focus on that.
Great. Thank you, Ruth. This has
Thank
been
you
incredible.
all. Thanks
Thank
for
you
the
so
questions.
much.